You're listening to A Seat at the Tech Table, a podcast by Sisters in Tech, hosted by Anna and Esther Kofariji. This podcast highlights the experiences of Black women working and thriving in the tech industry. You'll learn about how they found their paths into tech, and hopefully you'll be inspired to consider whether there's a seat for you at the tech table.
Today's guest is Mariam Braimah, a New York-based product designer. Hi, Mariam.
Hi, Mariam.
Hello, how's it going?
We're good. Wonderful. Very excited to speak with you today.
Yes, welcome to the Seat at the Tech Table. First of all, we want to get straight into it. We want you to tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're from, and what you do.
Yes, so my name is Mariam. I'm from New York, and I'm of Nigerian descent, as you all are. And we just I think spoke about this, that we're Edo, and Yoruba, so a cool mix. And I'm currently a product designer at Netflix from my 9 to 5, and then from my 5 to 9, and sometimes 5 to also 5. I'm the co-founder of Kimoyo Insights, which is a platform connecting user testers in Africa with product teams around the world looking for research advice. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. And I could go in more detail, but I know that that's the whole point of this podcast.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you for the intro. And before we get into the details about your journey, we want to know a little bit about you. So you're currently based, right now you're in Chicago, but you're currently based in New York. Have you always been based there?
No, actually. So funny enough, well, pandemic has different plans for everybody. So, of course, everyone's moving around. But I was actually based in San Francisco for 7 years after class. So, 2013 through 2020. And funny enough, when the pandemic, so I should say this, I moved to New York in February of this year. I knew that I was going to move to New York, though, because I just purchased a house. So I'm like, yeah, we got a house. So by the time I closed, it was in end of February, early March. But for most of the last half of 2020, like me and my boyfriend were pretty much just on the road between Chicago. We were just doing everything, like traveling, driving everywhere, obviously trying to be COVID safe. So I was kind of like not without an address for the last part of 2020. I was in San Francisco prior to that for 7 years. And before COVID hit, my plan was I was going to be in San Francisco for 2 more years. So 2021. And then I was planning on moving somewhere within the continent, either Nigeria or Ghana or Rwanda. Yeah. But COVID, COVID has plans.
It has plans.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So prior to San Francisco, like I guess growing up, where were you based? What did growing up look like? It would just be nice to get a bit of that detail. Yeah.
So in New York, I grew up half my life in Queens, the other half of my life in Long Island. And so if anyone's from Queens, we out here. But yeah, I grew up specifically in Far Rockaway, Queens. And in Long Island, I grew up in Hoppa, Long Island. And so the thing I like to tell people is like, it was a very different transition where it's like, I spent, the first half, like everywhere was Black, everybody was Black, everything was Black, and different types of Black, Nigerian, Caribbean, African, all different types of people, because, it's New York. And then we moved to Long Island, and it was like very much a quick culture shift. And so it was like, okay, it went from 99% Black to like 99% white. And I think that was definitely the first time I experienced racism, which was obviously it's not a great thing, but I think it prepared me for going to school in Boston. And so I told people like, yeah, it's not funny, but it's like, I mean, if I didn't move to Long Island, I don't think my transition to Boston would have been as easy, because Boston is definitely up there in terms of a racist city. So I moved from I would say Queens. We were in an apartment to then we were in Long Island. We were in this like amazing like house suburb and that type of thing. And I think actually that move was one of the core reasons of why I actually got into like architecture and wanted to be an architect, because of like the shift in that move, which obviously I'm not, but I like to call myself a digital architect. I think I'm going to start calling myself that.
I love it. Oh, amazing. Okay, this is nice. We're getting into it because I can already relate. I used to do architecture as well, shifted into tech. But yeah, before we get into that detail, you've already mentioned that you studied architecture, but without talking about kind of what you studied, more so, what were your interests growing up?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always won sports. I was a tomboy growing up, so I've always loved sports, especially basketball. I still love basketball, nice. And I'm unfortunately still a Knicks fan. So, it's a struggle here. But yeah, like, I think definitely outside of sports, it would be drawing. So I always loved to draw. Naturally, I think I've always been good at drawing, sketching, whatever it might be. And music. I've always loved music. As a kid, I think, as a kid and still now, my favorite artist is King Sunny Ade. That was like, as a child, like I would just be at the parties, like having fun, like singing every single word. I don't even speak Yoruba well. I don't speak Yoruba at all. I don't understand it. So shame on my parents, but I was, very much a big Sunny Ade fan. And so, yeah, but I would say like, that was probably where most of my interests lie. And ironically, the music, honestly, all three of those things would never, obviously anything that Nigerian parents would want to hear their kids be interested in. I had everything, sports, music, and drawing. Like, you're just going to be a mess up, in life. But funny enough, I would say the thing why I think I was able to get away with it is because I was really good in school. So I was always I was pretty I was never bad in school. Like my grades, sometimes they would slip like for 1 year, but it was never I was always pretty good at school. They didn't have to really worry about me doing my work there. So I think they just kind of let me rock. And probably because I'm the middle child amongst like 4 girls. So so I think I can get away with some of that stuff. But drawing and music were definitely the key drivers in my life.
Okay, amazing. Nice.
So you did go on to study history of art and architecture at university. So tell us a bit about kind of your experience of that degree, your experience at uni, and the journey of kind of discovering yourself in the midst of learning at that stage of your life.
Yeah. So I think the journey starts first with like why I wanted to be an architect. Mm-hmm. And like we kind of like tapped into it already, where I was like, that shift of going from lower income housing in Far Rockaway to then going to a suburb, to a house in Long Island. I still always stayed in public schools throughout. And what I found interesting is like, my public school in Far Rockaway or public schools in that are your zone school. Because in New York it's different. Like most of the time after elementary school, generally people apply to get into middle schools or high schools. They normally don't go to their zone school. Like your zone school is usually not very good. Okay. So it's a weird process. Like it almost trains you for the SAT or the ACTs when you're applying to college, because you've been applying at like every major point after elementary school to get into a school and to get accepted. Like you got to do an essay, interview, all this stuff, right? Anyways, so zone schools just tend to be not that great. In Long Island, where you buy your house is where you normally are going to school, right? And so normally what happens is the better the school district, the higher the prices of the homes. And so when my parents were looking to leave and move, they were looking for the best public school district that they could afford from there. And so the house wasn't the best, like it wasn't the most expensive house in the neighborhood, but there was more like it was getting us into that school district. And I think that was the first time I started noticing like, oh, there's games, so like this life thing, right? You're like, oh, okay. Like it really, I think that was like, I didn't know it then, but I think that was when I realized you are where you live, like highly, you are where you live. And I felt it because I would go from, when we were in Long Island, I would move back and forth. We would go back and forth between Far Rockaway and Long Island because our church is still out there, or was still out there. Recently just moved. And so like I would still see, my old neighborhood. And like you go from Monday through Friday, you're in this suburb, and then Friday through Sunday, you're in your own neighborhood. And you could like, it's very easy to now compare and contrast. Yeah. And one of the things that came out of it is like, and I feel like I've told this story a few times, is like, when we moved to Long Island, I wasn't very, I didn't feel safe. And partly, okay, yes, obviously the racism doesn't really help in feeling safe. But like, I think more so was I didn't feel safe in our house for a long time, and I couldn't explain why. I just never felt like there was a bunch of nature, it was bugs, or, like outside. I think I was hearing birds for the first time that weren't chickens. Like, what is this? Like, there's no train, and so there's a lot of things that I was just like I wasn't really feeling there, but like I also just didn't really feel safe. And I remember in this public school in Long Island that I was in, should tell you the difference in public schools. In my public school, in Rockaway, we didn't even have a music class. In Long Island, the high school that I went to, they had an architectural drafting class, not just one, but two. Exactly, right. Like, and literally like architectural drafting, course, for it. It was next to like the wood shop and all of this stuff. So thankfully, like my parents moved there because I don't think I would have ever heard about or even cared to learn about architecture. So I took the class. And I don't know why I took it. I feel like I was just like, I want to draw this. And I don't care much about fine arts. I've never really been into that. Like painting and stuff. Like, I think it's too messy and I just don't, it's not for me. And so I like pencils and I like pencils. And so, but yeah, long story long, I feel like, but I went there, took the drafting class. And that was the first time I realized that, all of the things in our buildings are designed and they're developed and it's a choice. And more importantly, like I realized like how much everything's a choice, like the type of, like the level of which your outlet is on your wall, how high up it is, an architect has to decide that. Where a light switch goes, an architect has to decide that. What lights it controls, an architect has to decide that. All the way down to like, of course, what type of roof, is it using? What does the facade look like? What type of windows on your, all of that is a design choice. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. I love this. And like, you get to walk around with cool tools, and like as an architect. So I was like, this seems fun. Like, I think I'm going to be an architect. And more importantly, I think what ended up also happening at that point, I was just like, I think I may be an architect. I never told my parents because obviously I'm not crazy. I don't want to hear them talking about, that's not a doctor or anything. But what I think also then happened is I've started seeing in my old neighborhood a few of the people I went to elementary school with got incarcerated. And I started getting very interested in prison architecture. In that way. It was just like, in my mind, I'm like, the school I was in, my public school, New York does this a lot where they had something, I don't know if they still have it, it's called the Astor Program. And it's supposed to be like for gifted students. And so usually like every grade has one Astor class. This is an elementary school. And so in my elementary school, I was in the Astor class and it was like 30 people or so in that 30 kids in that class, separated from the other 4 classes that were like the regular students. And so when I was thinking in that class, I'm like, yo, like, again, this is what I'm saying. I'm seeing the differences in like the public school and your path. But like in that class, we were supposed to be the gifted students in that school. Now looking at like, some of them like on TV, literally on TV, like there was a drug raid and he was the gang leader for that situation. You know what I mean? Like it's his face. I'm like, what? Like he used to stutter in elementary school. Like we actually used to like fight. Like I didn't like him. But it's just like stuff like that, And I'm like, or somebody else got killed, from so you're hearing of it. You're like, what? Like you're just thinking about them as a kid. Like how did the paths go deviate in that way? So I got very interested in prison architecture. And I started looking more about like, I just wanted to understand like, what is his life like right now? Compared to, like mine. And that was the first time I saw like, okay, there's, you hear about it obviously, but like, it's different like when you're like actually looking into it. And I'm like, I'm looking at the architecture and I'm like, yo, like there's bars in the window in the prison architecture of it, right? And then I was thinking about my lower income housing in Queens, and like, there's also bars in that.
Wow.
Then, the floors. The floors look just like the floors in my old apartment. It's linoleum. It's cement. It's all this cold, cold and isolated type of architectural materials and design. And then when I looked at my house in Long Island, it's wood. It's siding. It's not bars on the windows. And then that was when I started thinking like, one, prison architecture seems super messed up in the way, it's created. It's created as a cage. But then 2, I was like, why are there so many similarities between and prison architecture? Wow. And that was when I was like, you know what? I really wonder, because like even my temperament as a person, like I used to be very angry, and like it's just like all of these were shifting, And then I started to wonder, like, hey, if lower income housing feels like prison, like, do you actually feel like you are like, how much is it grooming you for for prison in that mindset? Like how much is shaping that mindset? And it's actually interesting now. I didn't do this, but I promise I'll wrap this story up. But it's interesting now because people have been designing. There's been like real estate developers that are really focused on redesigning public housing so that it can incorporate more of this warm material. Like if you notice, a lot of like lower income housing always has like, it might have a basketball court, but it's not gonna have a garden. You know what I mean? Or like stuff like that. So things that require constant upkeep, they normally don't include in those areas. And those normally tend to be things that make you feel like, you know, you are home, like you are nurtured in your space. And so I'm already seeing, even actually my old complex was part of a real estate development project that they redesigned the spaces so that it could feel more welcoming. And what you see is crime goes down, you know, mortality goes down. Like literally you see it on there. So so that was my dream. I thought I was going to redesign lower income housing, and now I'm redesigning the Netflix app. So I'm very close, you know, to what I thought I could.
Wow. That's so interesting. And definitely, I think I can relate in some ways in the sense of I spent some time actually working in a prison, and the whole kind of, for want of a better word, I don't love to use this term, but the whole prison industrial complex, when you encounter it in any way, it does really impact your view of the world. You can't really understand prisons and how they work without it impacting how you think, I think. Which is really interesting.
What was your role in that?
So I was on my way to being a lawyer, and I worked in the prison just as kind of like a part-time admin job, really. So I did have some interactions with prisoners. It was very revealing, but that's what I did.
Yeah, I can imagine that shaping like that perspective and then bringing that into tech is probably completely, that's a whole podcast right there.
Yeah. So, I think about it a lot, definitely, even in the context of what I'm doing now. So yeah. But tell us about kind of studying art and architecture, because I'm an art lover and I studied landscape architecture as well. So actually, an architecture. Tell us what your experience was like.
Yeah, and so I had this dream. I was like, I wanted to go to Yale because I was like, Yale has the best architectural school. In my mind, I was like, it has some of the best undergraduate architectural school. And I heard about it in this show called Gilmore Girls. I don't know if you all have heard about the show. You know the shows? Okay.
I've never watched it, but I'm aware of its popular culture influence.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. That's moving to Long Island definitely introduced me to Gilmore Girls, because I don't think I would have heard of it prior to that. but I fell in love with the show, and in the show, the main character goes to Yale. And so immediately I'm like, oh, I want to go to Yale. And like the color was blue. I like blue. Blue's my favorite color. That was a dog. I love dogs. So I'm like, this seems perfect, right? Naturally. And but I ended up not getting in. And I ended up getting into Harvard, which I didn't want to go to. And because obviously that's my rival. I already had like internalized all of this. And I was just like, no, I don't want to do that. Like, you know, it's stressed out. Like, I don't know what was going on in my head then, but thankfully my dad like made me apply. You know, true African dad. So you gotta apply. But so I go to Harvard, and at Harvard at the time did not have a architectural undergraduate degree program. Okay. Yeah, so the closest that they had was history of art and architecture. Okay. We call our majors, we call them concentration. So the closest concentration they had was history of art and architecture. And what they allow you to do is like you could take classes at neighboring schools, you know, like because Boston has, I think, the largest school population in the nation. And so like there's a bunch of schools, neighboring schools that you can go by. There's MIT, there's Tufts, there's Boston University, there's Northeastern. There's like so many colleges like all within that realm. So what I was thinking was, I said, okay, I'm going to go to Harvard. I'm still going to be an architect. So I'm already still like, okay, I'm still being an architect. But I've noticed that like people in the past that have gone there as undergraduates, they normally would create their own major. So you can, or create their own concentration. You can do that and like architecture, right? And so I was like, I'm planning on doing that. And I was taking neighboring architectural classes at MIT. And so I love the architectural studio courses. Like, it was so fun. And I loved, like, it was also cool to like be on another campus, taking these classes with, like, you know, other students. And MIT's architectural program is pretty decent as well. And I think what's cool too is they also have like a media lab. So it was like I was starting to see like art and technology very much intersect on that side of things. So I love the studio course. And when it came time, I was noticing like, what do you need to get into a good Master's of Architecture program? And so I was looking at like the Graduate School of Design, we call it GSD, as like my goal was like I wanted to go there to study architecture. So I'm thinking, okay, one end, I'm going to build my portfolio. I don't know why. To this day, I don't know why this is what I thought. But I was like, you know, you need to understand Photoshop and Adobe Suite to be able to build an architectural student's studio. And I don't get it because you can't design buildings in Photoshop. So, but I don't know why. I just was like, I need to understand Illustrator and Photoshop and all this other stuff to build my portfolio for architectural school. And so I started learning those things. And then the other part was like you need to understand physics. And like most major architectural programs in the US, at least, require you to have have taken physics and passed physics in there. And so I was like, okay, my sophomore year, I'm going to take physics. And I'm just going to, you know, me and physics, I should say. In high school, I didn't really enjoy physics. Physics didn't enjoy me. So we just had a very rough relationship. I'm like, okay, let me just take it. Let me get it out. I wanted to get it out early because I didn't want to wait, you know, later on. And like, I'm struggling to get this physics degree, or physics course. Anyways, I took physics and I failed physics woefully. Like, it was just like, it was not good. So I failed it terribly. And I think at the same time, I was also looking at the job market for architects and the process, you know, for it. And it was like, you go to school as long as a doctor in the US, you literally apprentice. It's the same path. You apprentice the same way a doctor goes into residency. And then you leave and you make a quarter of the amount that a doctor makes. You have the same bills, you know? And so I'm like, hold on. So even though physics and I, you know, we had beef, I also got to take physics because I would have been a struggling architect. And I don't know if I loved architecture enough for it. And so so that was kind of where I was, where I'm like, all right, I don't, this isn't going to be my career path. But I knew that I liked the studio part. I knew that I liked the design. I knew like I liked the creative. So I'm like, okay, I know I'm closer. I'm getting closer to what it is. Yeah. At the same time, because I was learning Photoshop and Illustrator, like the easiest way to learn it, like at that time, was not like to be like, hey, can I create a building for you? You know, in my Photoshop file, which again is impossible. But it's much easier to tell people like, oh, I do graphic design. And so I was looking at graphic design as my way to kind of get more of like my design exposure because we didn't really have those courses, at least to the best of my knowledge, we didn't have those courses. So I was using that to teach myself those things. So most of the time I was doing like gigs, like side gigs, where it's like, I think I was a graphic design, what do you call it? Contractor at one of our student agencies. So I would do a lot of like graphic designs for them. And it got me exposure to be like, oh, I was designing for like different settings, like designing a poster for the train system in Boston, or designing like an app logo. Like I started doing a lot more of that stuff. But I always knew I didn't want to do graphic design. I was just like, let me just use it so I can get comfortable with Photoshop and things like that. So yeah, that's kind of like the story. And so why I did history of art and architecture to bring it all back, learning in school. And so unbeknownst to me, like, I was doing a lot of stuff that was wild. I should have probably figured my life out. But like, unbeknownst to me, like, I'm going to, you know, it's obviously a very wealthy school. People that attend are, you know, some of them tend to be very wealthy. And I'm also in the, like, concentration or the major that probably has the wealthiest kids on campus, because you think about it, it's like, what do you do with a history of art and architecture degree? Like, what do you do with a history of art degree? Like, you're usually going to get into curation and stuff like that, which means you probably, more likely than not, most of those people were like, they were raised in a family that, like, you know, art was a thing. They were going to the museum. They were you know, and that type of thing. But like, to be like in the space of like, I'm going to Sotheby's like as my career path, like I'm like, that's not, I don't even know what that is on there. So like, I would be in classes and it would be like, yeah, you know, I remember one class that I was like, he said, there's a painting here. I forget who it was. I don't know why I want to say Pelagio. It wasn't, maybe it was Pelagio. I don't remember. You probably know better. On there. Clearly I didn't go to class. I should just say that. There. But he was talking about something and he was like, oh, but I'm not going to spend too much time on this painting because all of you have been to the Louvre, so you understand. You know.
Wow.
I was like, what? And that was literally when it clicked in my head. I said, oh no, this isn't for me. But like they didn't have, so they gained like, Harvard scared me for a second. They were like, oh, like this is history of art and architecture. But most of the classes were actually about art. Only a few were about architecture and the history of architecture. So I didn't really spend a lot of time in my classes, but I needed it to get my degree. So I kind of, once I realized I didn't want to be an architect, I started looking at, trying different things. And so I looked into computer science and I was like, I really want to, like, I've always liked computers. I've always liked, playing, and the idea of like, oh, maybe I'm a hacker was interesting. I took an introductory computer science course and they also scammed me in that. I thought it was going to be HTML, CSS, JavaScript. These guys started talking about basic C and like, I don't even know. It's like I was learning Latin. They were like talking about arrays. Once they got to arrays, I was like, this is not for me. And so I quickly stopped going to that class too. I was like, this is not fun. And so let me know when HTML, CSS come back. Cause I thought it was going to be front end stuff, but they were trying to really teach you the core basics of, computer science. Like they're trying to teach you Latin when I was like, I'm just trying to learn like how to say hello in Spanish. Right. And so like, that's it. So finally I had to go to class because they were like, you need to come to class. You haven't been in class in a while. And I looked at the curriculum and it happened to be the day, there was one day in the whole curriculum at the end of the course, towards the end of the course, I should say, where it was, what was it? It was about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And one day they were like, oh yeah, for one go to teach it. Yeah, imagine. So I'm like, you know what? If there's one class I'm gonna go to this one because this is literally why I signed up for this course. Mm-hmm. And so I go, and then they're starting, before getting into HTML, they start talking, or CSS, they start talking about graphical user interfaces, or GUI. Mm-hmm. This is my junior spring of my semester. So I only have one full year left after this point. So they start talking about graphical user interfaces. And it started talking about GUI, and I'm like, yo, what is GUI? This seems like kind of cool. And they were talking about like Xerox, like icons, like how Apple created icons, like all this other stuff. Mm. And that was the first time I'm like, yo, this seems really cool. That was my first exposure to it. And that's like, the basics of user interface, user experience design, which is obviously what I do now. And I just went into a rabbit hole about it because the thing that I liked about it is it gave me all of the thinking of, architecture and like creating choices, like making decisions. But I could do it without having to do no physics. And more importantly, I could do it at a faster scale. That like, architecture, at least in the US, it takes a really long time to get a building approval, like all this stuff. Like I could iterate on it really quickly and I could do it from my laptop. And then I went and looked at the job market. And at that point, like UI UX wasn't still pop. It wasn't really very known, but I noticed that a lot of the people were in San Francisco. And I looked at the job market and I started looking at salaries. And I'm like, hold on. And so I'm like, you know what? Maybe this might be a thing. And I didn't need to go to graduate school because at that point my grades were like, I was like, I'm not going to graduate school. So you could let me go on that. I think that was how I got into that. And I took they only had one course related to user interface design. CS 179. I'll never forget the name of the course. And that was when I learned the basics of like how to conduct research, how to, make design-driven decisions, how to formalize a problem, how to storyboard, like all of that stuff I learned there. And to this day, that's the only formal design course I've taken in my design career. And everything else I've been able to just build off of that. Like, people say I need a logo because I was doing graphic design. So people always hit me up. At that same time, apps were popping up. So they're like, yo, like I heard you do logos. Like, can you do a logo? And I'm like, what do you need a logo for? And like, oh, it's for my new app. And I'm like, oh, like I could also do your app for you. I didn't know how to do any of that stuff. But I'm like, let me just try. And so I was just getting my reps in that way. But all of this happened my senior year. The last thing people usually ask me is they're like, what were your internships like? And I only had one internship in college that was about design because I learned so late, right? So it was like my junior year. Once I heard about it in junior spring, in that computer science course, I started looking at like, okay, let me see if I can get an internship in it. And just because I didn't have a portfolio like that was about user interface design, I didn't really know much about it. I knew that I wasn't going to get any roles that were related to that. I applied anyway. I think I applied to like over 150 jobs, or over 150 internships my junior year. I got interviewed for 2. And after a while, like halfway through, I think I realized, I'm like, yo, I'm not ready. Like, no one's going to take me because I don't have any experience in user interface design, and at that time it was UI UX design. So I started switching to graphic design because I'm like, yo, like I have graphic design experience. Like I've been doing this in different ways, like for organizations, paid, like unpaid, like I've done it in different ways. So I'm like, at least I have that. Let me use that as a way to show that I have a graphic design career, quote unquote, or design career. Because what I was noticing is I wasn't looking at what to do for my internship to get my internship then. I was looking at what do I need to do now in order to get a job in user interface design next year. And what I was noticing is that all those roles for entry-level user interface designers were really, they would say, it's okay if you don't have, because it was college roles, you know, like, so some of them would say, you don't have to have like full user interface experience, but they would always say, you need Adobe, you understand Illustrator, you have a design-related, you know, job in the past. So I'm like, if I do a graphic design internship, then I can say I do have a design-related job. Okay. I understand Adobe, I understand Illustrator. So that was why I really did it. And I got one job. I only got one job. And I remember too, I had to fight for that job because when he saw my resume, he was like, oh, she doesn't want to do graphic design. And so they never followed up. And so I followed up and I said, hey, I would love to learn more about the role. And the recruiter was like, he really doesn't think you want to do graphic design. And I'm like, that's not true. I would love to do graphic design. You know, like that is my like.
So what?
Right. Yeah. And so he took me. And so once if I can get an interview, if you can get me in face, majority of the time I'm going to get the job. And so I'm like, just get me in the door. Like, I think there's maybe 2 jobs I haven't gotten that like I applied for in person. And so, so I'm like, just get me in the door. Like I'll do everything else. So he took the job and he like gave me he took the interview and he was like, I'm going to tell you, I didn't think you wanted to do this, but I can tell you're passionate. I'm like, definitely. Yeah. So yeah, that's how I got my graphic design job.
Nice. That's so cool. Oh, I just want to pick out one thing from what you said because I think it's such a key message for our listeners. You said that basically throughout your journey, you gradually, eventually realized that architecture was not the career for you. But you said one thing that I think is really key. You said, that wasn't a career for me, but I knew I was getting closer and getting closer to what I want to do. And I think that is such a good attitude to have in terms of life experiences. Because this year in particular, I've been thinking about kind of the meaning of failure. And I just feel like some of us take it so hard, but we don't achieve the things we've kind of put on a pedestal. Sometimes other people have put them on a pedestal for us. But no, when you kind of get redirected from something, let's put it that way, you're getting closer to the thing that is meant for you. So I just love that element of your attitude.
Can I add to that? Because I think it's so important that you called that out. Because that time in my life was so hard. And that like I can talk about it now and joke about it now. And like I think I was joking about it, you know, then. And I did think that like, I'm getting closer. But I was so lost in like, what am I getting closer to though? You know what I mean? Like in that, and then the only thing that I could do was I was like, I could just keep building my portfolio. Yeah. Like that was it. But I'm like, yo, I don't even know if I didn't have the, I didn't go to class because I wasn't interested in what I was learning, but I think I also was very defeated, you know, in that moment. I definitely was very defeated and like, I'm not supposed to be here. This is like showing why I'm not supposed to be here. I already felt that I wasn't supposed to be here. So this is just like validating that. And I gave up on school. Like that was what happened. I didn't give up on like design, you know, which basically was what made me stay in school. But the minute I said I don't want to be an architect, I'm like, oh, okay, at this point I'm here to just get the degree. It doesn't matter how I get it, you know, in there. And I think that like a lot of people don't talk about that, you know, portion in the journey where it's just like, you know, like there's going to be points where like I was close to failing out of college majority of my time after failing physics. Prior to that, I was pretty much an A/B student in college, you know, mostly A's, honestly. But like for the rest of my time in college, every year I was on academic probation, every year. And it wasn't because I wasn't smart. I wasn't going to class, you know? So it's like, you know, like that. I mean, I guess that makes me not smart for not going to class. But like that should tell you like just like how much I had just given up on it. And thankfully, design really was the only thing that I was like, design and music, because I was DJing, which my parents weren't very happy about, but I was making money. So but design and music were the only reason why I was staying in school, where I was like, okay, like I just need to get this degree so that I can do something in design. I don't even know what, but I'm just going to keep creating. I'm going to keep creating whatever it is, and I'll figure it out. But it wasn't that. And I would say from that failure, because it was probably the first time I really failed, because I don't really talk about going to Harvard that much, but like obviously, like I couldn't have been failing that much to get in, so it's not like I'm like, I hate school. School's not enjoyable, but I'm good at it, right? Yeah. But so it was really the first time in my life that I really like failed something that was like, yo, what the hell is going on? And I think it did knock me back in there, and I feel like when I got to San Francisco, I was like, I'm even though, anyways, when I was going to go on a whole tangent, but when I got to San Francisco, I remember being like, okay, I'm in the scenario where I was with some of the people I had gone to school with who were close friends. Yeah. And we were out of school. And this is the first time I started hearing people talk about like, man, like I didn't think I belonged there. Like, oh, I was struggling, and I'm looking at them like, yo, I always saw you in the library. I was joking. You were in the library doing books. You were, you were doing all this other stuff. Like I thought you had everything in order. Mm-hmm. And it was the first time I realized that like everybody is going through some form of imposter syndrome. And like, it was also the first time I realized I should have talked about it. Because I think if I spoke about it versus like internalizing and that type of thing, if I spoke about it with people amongst my peers, I would have been able to like bounce back a lot quicker. Actually, up until this point now, every time I feel some type of way, which is usually every time I start something new, but every time I do something that I don't know what I'm doing, I'm probably scared of it. One, anything I'm scared of, I always do. That's like, I've always been that way. But like two, instead of me doing it on my own, what I've learned to do is like, the minute I start feeling that imposter syndrome, or the minute I start feeling like I'm flailing, I talk to people about it, because what I find comfort in is hearing other people going through it. So it makes me feel like I'm not other for feeling like I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah. I think that's so important. And yeah, I think likewise, in university, no one talked about their struggles really. Yeah. I mean, maybe one or two conversations here and there, because and generally with the people you live with, but generally kind of people in your course, they're all trying to come up together. You don't talk about the hard stuff.
No, really. Trying to get through.
Yeah. That's so key.
We just trying to make it.
Surviving. Struggling inside. Cool.
Okay, so you're currently a product designer at Netflix. For those who don't know, please explain what the role of a product designer is and exactly what you do at Netflix.
Yes, so I put it to tie the architecture thing back into all of this. A product designer is the architect of a application, of a user experience, or what have you. So the same way architects determine how a building will look, how all of the places, like how many bedrooms it will have, where the doorway will go, what have you. And then they work with a contractor and a civil engineer to actually execute on building it. The architecture is not actually building and designing, building the physical house, but they're designing the layout of it. That's the same way a user experience or a product designer does with an application. So if you take Netflix, for example, the way I'm architecting Netflix, as of today, I should say, is I work on our TV team. So everything that you see on the TV application, that's the TV team side of things. When you turn Netflix on your TV, that's the side that I work on. And I'll give a better example. On the TV team, I specifically handle anything related to popularity, newness, and coming soon. So most popular is top 10. Like creating that list and like figuring out what is the design experience for that. The other section would be new and popular. Most people don't use this section, so I'm gonna like put a plug in there. You should use new and popular. Sometimes I work on it. But like if you take top 10 as the architect or the product designer for that experience, the things that we have to look at is, okay, how many titles do we want to show? All 10 titles in a row? Do we only want to show, like, where do we cut it off? Do we cut it off at 6 titles? Like, what is the layout of that? Like, obviously, there's a design element, too, of, like, having the cutoff numbers and what have you. But that's, like, so pretty much we determine the layout of an application. And we try to use informed decisions, both from a data perspective, from a user perspective, of course, from a user perspective, to try to achieve those experiences.
Amazing. Okay. So what does like an average day look like? What do you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I don't think people probably want to hear this, but like on a day-to-day basis, you're in email more than you're in Figma. You're in email and Slack more than you're in Figma. You're probably, and I would say for me, on a day-to-day basis, I'm usually gathering context. Like I feel like that's a lot of the job of a designer is majority of the time people think of like, okay, you're in Figma or Figma is a design application, like a Sketch or Adobe Photoshop or Adobe XD. But Figma is probably the most popular one right now. Yeah. But, people think of it as like, okay, you just start creating stuff. And the reality is that that's like the last 10% of it, maybe the last 20, percent of it. Most of it, though, is trying to understand what is the problem, like, and why is it a problem? Is it a big enough problem for the business? Is it a big enough problem to prioritize? Okay, who's experiencing the problem? Okay, is there any research that we have of people who have experienced this? What are their pain points? What do they enjoy? Okay, now from there, it's like, all right, now we've established this is a problem. We've established who the problem is for. Then it becomes, okay, what is the platform that we're designing for? Do we design this? Do we achieve this problem? Do we achieve the solution using television? Do we achieve the solution using a remote? Like literally the remote. Like people only think about screens. Let me not generalize. I think when you hear about design, they're like, oh, it's these creatives that are in the corner just like drawing in their notebooks. And like, I think like there's like so much that design touches that's not just a digital screen or a notebook. It's your actual laptop. Yeah. It's the remote. Like I was going to say, it's like, Netflix pioneered this of like putting a Netflix button on the physical remote. Like that is a design experience. It's even, there's a guy on our team, his name is Frank, or he was on our team, I should say. His name is Frank, product designer. But he's interestingly became a sound designer because he designed the Doom. That's
oh.
Yeah, literally like because he just wanted to do something, you're creative. And that's why I tell you that like you end up being creative in so many different ways, but it may start on a screen, but he was like, yo, we need what if we had a sound for Netflix? Now that's become this like whole marketing thing. We just launched like a To-Doom site yesterday, so it's but he literally started that. I'm not going to say where it started because it's really not a great story anymore because it was House of Cards. So I'm just going to leave it at that. But that was something where he just created that. And it was an idea, but so it's not just the screen, I would say, but like the day to day is mostly like gathering context. Speaking to people, I do a lot of one-on-ones. I'm not a good text communicator person. So I normally like, hey, let's do a 30-minute chat. Thankfully, Netflix, I feel like allows for that. I don't know if other places are as friendly with one-on-ones, but I do a lot of one-on-one meetings with people where sometimes it's just like, hey, just get to know you. Other times it's like I usually, if I'm working with a project, so I should be succinct about this. Half of my time is most likely working on something that I'm getting context on, that I'm like actively trying to create, like understand the problem. Another half of my time in the same day is probably on like things that are in a more build state, meaning like they've been designed. Yeah. We figured out what we're going to do. We created the architectural spec, right, for it, or the architectural draft for it. You can imagine if you're saying, here's the layout, here's the blueprint. That's the word. We created the blueprint of the design. Now it's in the space where it's starting to get built. So imagine like if I'm the architect, it's like I'm going on the site to see like, how as far as construction going. Yeah. Like, and so like normally I do that if I'm in that space. I'm meeting with my engineering partner, usually on a weekly basis at minimum. Sometimes, this is when we used to be in the office, I'm really close to my engineering partners. I like to be that way. Sometimes I'll I'll just move my seat and I'll just sit next to them while we're building it. Because there's things that come up where like you can only design so much on a screen. Yeah. You have to see it, you have to feel it, you have to experience it to be like, actually that don't work. Like, are we seeing it now? Or like from a coding perspective, they're like, look, this isn't coming out the way we think it can come out, or it's not going to like be able to execute or perform in the way we need it to perform. Can you come up with a different solution? So I think a lot of times too is like there'll be the half of it trying to understand the context, trying to understand the problem, wireframing ideas. Then the other half is like, okay, actually executing on it, building on it, and realizing that you're gonna have to probably iterate on this. So your blueprint is not set in stone; it's more like set in sand.
So interesting. So interesting. And I think it's so nice to hear how you are able to kind of compare your experience of your studies of architecture and art and design to your current day experience at Netflix. And I just wonder, like, how did you know Netflix was the right place for you? And yeah, just to get a bit of a sense of like what made you choose Netflix, because you're able to kind of like really make a nice comparison and align kind of your thoughts around kind of the context and understanding of a building to what you do at Netflix in relation to sound and kind of touch and just a total package of the experience. So yeah, how did you know Netflix was for you?
That's a great question, because it's funny. Netflix is only my second product design job out of college.
Okay.
And when I joined, I was 24, about to be 25. And the average age on my design team was probably like early 30s, mid 30s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I was like I never, before I even heard Netflix had a design team, I didn't know that it had a design team. Actually, when my first job, like, so to bring it back, San Francisco, I was like, I need to go to San Francisco. I applied to only job in San Francisco. I got one job. I went here. It was a small, I was looking for mid-sized startups that had funding, because I was like, I'm not trying to deal with no layoffs. Like, we're not doing that. Like, you know, like had fresh funding. I wanted fresh money, you know, in the startup. And so I was looking for that. And I was also looking for them in particular because I knew I didn't have the experience to work at a Google, a Facebook, a Netflix, even as an entry-level designer, just because I didn't have any formal UI, UX experience. So I knew I couldn't even apply to those jobs if I wanted to. Additionally, I knew I wanted to be somewhere where I would get a chance to experience all different parts of design in a corporate sense. Because at that point, like when I moved to San Francisco, well, as I was applying for jobs, I still had never had an actual user experience, user interface job. I knew I liked it, but I'm like, okay, I want to really understand, like, make sure that I like it before I start building an entire career path around this. So that was why I really love it. And I'm really still a big proponent of people working in mid-level startups or at mid-level startups, because they allow for you, the teams are usually still small enough where you can have impact. And because it's so small, like there's probably a lot of stuff that people can't do. So you can like kind of pivot out of your role, really, like you dip into other stuff really easily without there being a lot of red tape or like other people, you know, stepping on toes. And you can probably take a lot more initiative in that way. And on top of it, you probably end up growing a lot faster because you're not in this bucket of like, you're one of 1,000 designers, you know, building a button for your entire first year. Instead, you're probably working with like 3 other designers who have different talents, who are talented in different ways. But because of it, you can probably go, you know, you don't have to only do user interface design. Like at my first job, I think when I joined, I was a product design associate. My first like half of the year, I think my first half of my year there, I was doing email design. And I remember being like, what the hell am I doing email design? You know, and like I was literally doing email design. And like to this day, I tell people, if you're trying to learn how to do product design, start with email.
Oh, wow.
It sounds weird. Yeah, it sounds weird, but email has a lot of the constraints of a like application, of designing a Netflix, of designing a Facebook, of designing a Google, because it's 2 things. One, it's responsive. You have to do email, like you have to do email as a mobile version, and you need the desktop version. So you get the responsiveness there. From a limitations perspective, unbeknownst to people, email is probably harder to design for than mobile because there's so many technical limitations to it that you cannot achieve. So you have to be very focused on what your design is trying to do. And it forces you to be creative in like, you know, different solutions there. Like you can't use motion that much in email. Like, you know, it has to be a GIF, right? So it's like, so you have to be very intentional with what are the words that you're showing. What is the hierarchy, typographical hierarchy that you're dealing with? It's a lot of copy. Understanding copy is huge as a designer, you know? So it's like email to me is still like, it's the fundamentals, like it has all the fundamentals of design without it being overwhelming. Yeah. Like you're not, you know, like, so you don't have to be like, oh, there's a homepage, there's this. Because the thing is, if you can design a good email, you'll be able to design a good application because it's the same thought process. So I think I was doing that a lot. And wow, so I got exposure to email design. I knew I don't really like this email design stuff, but I know I'm learning a lot. From there, I started doing landing pages, and I learned about SEO. And so stuff like this, like I wouldn't, and this is all my first year. Even then, from that, my first year in doing landing pages, I started then. Landing pages are like, you land on, like when you search for something that, let's say you search for Netflix Stranger Things. If you search for Netflix Stranger Things, we have a side of our website that is for if you're not a member or you're not signed in, that you can go to the Stranger Things and you'll see like kind of like an overview of like what Stranger Things is. Right. So you can think like people call those landing pages, like it's more like a marketing kind of page. Ironically, at Netflix, I designed our landing pages for when I was on the growth side of things. So it's crazy. Like my path in my old job, which is called Inflection, I followed a similar path in Netflix where it was like at Netflix when I first joined, I was doing mostly non-member stuff. So user acquisition, sign up, growth, everything about money. I call us we're team money. So when I joined, I was doing like email designs. I was doing mobile sign up. I was doing landing page. Like the fact when you type on Google and you type Stranger Things, you type Squid Games. When I joined, on the side, it doesn't have it. Like it has, if you type that, you can say like watch on Netflix or watch on Amazon Prime or what have you. Now, when I joined, Netflix wasn't on there. And I remember like I was pretty vocal. I was like, yo, like what if we like try to get Netflix on there? And my first year, like we were having partnership conversations with Google to make that happen. And it's like, that's one thing where to answer your question, the thing that I loved about Netflix was 2 weeks prior to Netflix, I was like, I was pretty much, I got an offer from Google. Like my dream was when I left, I knew when I came to San Francisco, I'm like, in 2 years time, I want to be at Google. And I'm like, okay, this job will give me that first impact. I'll get exposure. I'll get understanding of, do I like design? Do I like user interface design? I'll be able to like, have the impact of someone that has been in the industry longer than what my time shows. And so 2 years in, I'm like, I'm about to apply to Google. My head was set. Like I always used to look at Google's sites and like, what are their job requirements for a product designer? And I would be like, okay, what are these things that I don't have? Let's start focusing on getting those on the job. And then I remember I was about to like apply. I started an application process. This is only the other second job that I didn't get by talking when I met them in person, and it was with WhatsApp. And so I got an interview with WhatsApp, and I got there like, I could tell I was like, I don't think I'm ready for it because I was in the application process. I mean, I was in the interview and he was asking some questions and I was like, oh, I don't think I'm still that advanced. And I didn't end up getting the job, which is thankful. But when I was applying for those jobs, my manager at the time, she offered me a management position at Inflection. And I knew, I was like, I don't want to be a manager. I already said no. I was like, no. And she didn't know I'm applying to other jobs. So when I didn't get the job at WhatsApp, I was like, because she told me, she's like, why did you take a week? And when I was applying, I was like literally going to the application the next few days. I didn't get the job. And I was like, let me think about that management thing. And I was talking to my parents and they're like, don't ever deny a management position because you just get different exposure. So I was like, okay, let me take, because to me, I'm like, management is not design. I'm like, that's not
yeah.
And I'm 2 years in, like, I don't need to be managing nobody. Right. And so, but again, like at this point, I've been a creative director for one of our marketing, one of our recruiting campaigns, like on top of being a product designer, like, so I was getting a lot of exposure to these things. And I'm like, you know what? Well, I'm here to understand the different parts of design. Let me see what it's like to be a design manager. And I ended up managing a research and a design team of about 5 people. I think it was 5 or 6 people. And what that was the first thing that taught me, but I put in my structure, I said, I'll manage, but I still have to design. Because I didn't get comfortable, managing and then completely lose my 2 years of work that I've been doing. So when I did that, I quickly learned that like, oh, this is what I learned. Design is outside of just a screen. Like I started getting into organizational design and like how do you make sure like these 2 people work really well together. The process that we're using is not working well. Like even just I think one of my first core wins as a manager was we as a design team were not engaging with our engineering team because they were in the Ukraine. And it was clearly affecting, our process, our quality of work. And so one of the biggest things I enforced was like, we're going to have weekly syncs with our Ukrainian engineering team. And on top of that, like we're going to be showcasing work early on and often. And I actually developed a process for like, how do we get designs from wireframe to concept all the way out to test? And I've shared that process with the engineering team, with the design team, as well as our product management team and our quality assurance team. And in doing that, it actually cut down bugs by 90% in that. Wow. And that was the first time I'm like, yo, like but it felt like design. So I'm like, oh, you know what? That'd be too bad. But at the end of the day, I still love creating. I love people, they're great, but it's like, I don't want to deal with all the BS that comes with management. And so like, it was fun to see the processes work, but I still love the engineering side. And so when I think about that, why I tell that story is because I was doing that. So at that point, I'm like, you know what, let me do this for a year. So instead of my 2-year goal being at Google, I was like, okay, let me stretch it to a 3-year goal, you know? And again, I don't think I would have gotten a job at Google anyway if I applied at that time. And so when the time came closer to 3 years, we actually had a series of layoffs at my job. I didn't actually get laid off, but that kind of was like it's like 8-9 months. And like, it was almost like a forcing function for me where I'm like, okay, I'm not going to wait the 3 years. Let me just start applying now. And same thing. So I got through Google, did the application, got the job. It was a long process, like 2 or 3 months. But I got the job I think I was applying for the job. I had my on-site interview. What's funny is that same day, there was a guy that I've been trying to meet for like 2 years. His name is Maurice Woods. Do you guys know him?
Has he got a podcast?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he has one. Interact Project is what he does.
Oh, yes. I know exactly who you're talking about. Yep.
Yeah. So Maurice, I heard him on a podcast.
Okay.
That's what it was. I heard him on a podcast. You know, he's doing Interact Project is doing stuff where they're teaching people in the Bay Area, Black, brown students about design. And so I'm like, this is like literally like the intersection of like all my things. It's like, you know, so I'm like, I really want to hear more about how he does it, like what he's doing, and like see if I can be of any assistance. And so we had been trying to meet for 2 years. I messaged him on LinkedIn just on the whim. Tried to meet for 2 years. We finally meet that day. He is, this is what I talk about. Like timing, man, is crazy. But like he was leaving Yahoo. He was at Yahoo as a senior product designer. He was leaving Yahoo, and I think it was his last week. And he was getting ready to go to Microsoft. And he was like, yo, why don't you just come to Yahoo for lunch or something, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, all right, cool. This guy's like, he's awesome. He's doing things that I want to do in my life in the future. I'm excited to finally be able to meet him. And that was the same week that I was applying, like I had my on-site for Google. So my Google on-site, I think, was the next day or 2 days later. We get there, we talk, had a great conversation. It was like a 4-hour conversation. We were just talking, like, you know, because he's chilling. This is last week, you know, at Yahoo. And I go, and he asked me, like, towards the end, he was like, oh, like, so what are you doing? Like, what's your plan right now? And I said, oh, I'm actually applying, you know, to Google, and like I'm in the process of applying to other design roles. He's like, oh, okay, cool. Like, if I see anything come up, like, you know, I'll send it your way. Yeah. And shout out to Maurice. That I kid you not, that same night, that exact same night that we met, Dantley Davis, who is and you know, shout out to Dantley. Dantley, who was formerly the chief design officer at Twitter now.
Oh yes.
He was a design director
at Netflix. Yeah. Yeah.
Mobile design director at Netflix. And Dantley, you know, it's not that many Black people, so in design world. So I guess Netflix was looking for a design director. Dantley messaged Maurice that same night. Maurice is like, yo, like I just got a job at Microsoft, but here's Mariam, right? Who, you know, literally same night. And I'm like, and you know, he goes by Mo. I'm like, Mo, man, like, you know, one we just met. I'm like, also Mo, like, I'm not a design director, bro. Like, you know, you know, like they're like, and it's, you know, and this is my first time ever hearing about Netflix as a design. I'd never even thought about Netflix.
What about it? Yeah.
Right, because I'm like, what the hell are they designing? I was very confused. I'm like, what is the so when I saw it, I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like I use Netflix, you know, I'm like, but I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, you know, I'm going to Google. Like I already, you know what I mean? Like, you know, so I'm in application mode. I might as well, like I already have the things prepared. And so Dantley sees his message and Dantley passes me off to the design recruiter for the team. Wow. And he's like, hey, like, here's Mariam. Like, you know, like, are there any, I think there might be some roles open, you know, for her. And it turns out they were, you know, hiring product designers. And so the design recruiter, we had a meeting. So I go to my Google interview that same week. And I think I messaged the design recruiter. Like, she was like, okay, let's talk next week. By the time like we were talking, I think like I was going to have a comment. Like, I think I already gotten the offer from Google or something like that. I can't remember. But so her and I speak, and literally from the time I would say that Dantley sent her the message to the time that I got my offer letter for Netflix, it was about 2.5 weeks. It was very quick. Like Netflix design hiring process is usually very quick. Like I tell
super quick. Like what?
Very quick. And the company at that time, the company was only like 4,000 people. you know,
wow.
so like, it's like, and we had just gone global. Like it was 2016. We had just literally like become available in like 130 something markets or what have you. And their growth team was, so because they had just gone global, the growth design team was looking for more designers for that. And all the stuff I had done at Inflection was related to growth and acquisition. This is another thing I've told people is like, if you're trying to get into the design world, focus on growth and acquisition. Because like, and when I'm saying growth and acquisition, I'm talking about like signing up new members, getting new members, getting, you know, email, like SEO, like all that stuff. Because no matter what company you work for, they're always going to need to figure out how to get more people to sign up. They're probably always going to need to figure out how to get people to pay. You know, they're probably always going to send email. So like, try to focus on that. So, and usually from a design perspective, not to like, you know, belittle the design, because it's very difficult design work, because literally you can see your impact on the bottom line of a business. Like I've lost Netflix a lot of money. I've made Netflix a lot of money too, but like, you know what I mean? But like you can literally directly see like, hey, when I changed the background color of our sign up flow, it impacted revenue by 1%, which equates to $200 something million. You know what I mean? Like you can literally see your design. So it's great as an early designer, because you start to realize data, like what your impact is outside of the visual side of things. But it's also really easier to get into because it's input fields. It's not really like, so like from a visual perspective, you don't have to be a strong visual designer. You just have to understand the thinking of it. And then you get, you know, you expose your visual design from there. So I think like, so that was kind of like it. So they were hiring there. And what shifted me, because like I said, I was literally, my foot is in the door of Google. But the thing that changed it was, one, the Netflix design team it felt more senior. I was able to see who I was going to be working with. With the Google application process, they don't give you much exposure to who your team is, you know? So you don't really know who you're going to be working with. I think that at one point they were like, oh, it might be the Google Home team, and like Google Home had just launched. So like I was like, I don't know who I'm working with. The other part was, my biggest concern was I knew I wanted to work at a global company. Like my next role, I was like, I want a big brand, because I was just like marketing wise, like I want to just get the brand on my resume. So I knew I wanted a big brand. I knew I wanted to design for a global company, because I wanted to understand what is it like designing for users at scale. And I knew that I think those are and I think I wanted to learn more about like business, like globally business.
Right.
But like, no, that's not true. I definitely wanted to understand more about business, the business of design, without getting an MBA. And I kind of had accepted that to get all three of those things, I would have to be a cog in machine. Like I kind of accepted I would do my 2 years at Google, you know, kind of like, you know, be one of many, and just like do my get it done, and then move on to like maybe back to being like a more mid-sized startup. And the great thing about Netflix is it offered the brand, it offered the you know, global expertise. Business wise is what really got me. Everyone is thinking from a business strategy. Designers were thinking heavily business strategy. Like they were using terms I'd never heard of, you know, like where I'm like, you have an MBA, like, you know, like they were very data driven in that way. And what also got me was they had like a meeting where anybody could come to this meeting of any level. And that's what we literally like debate about what features should go out in the product. What, like, is this the right decision? And anyone, you can be customer service, you can be, you know, on content, you can be in product, doesn't matter. You can have a voice in like what decisions the company is making, not just product, but even like from a content perspective sometimes. So that was really what sold me on it. And then lastly, I looked at the people on our team and I'm like, I could go to Google. I'll be one of 100 people. I mean, one of 1,000 designers probably. I probably will have impact. The company is this at Netflix. I can literally see all the designers. It was 40 people. Wow. You know what I mean? Like, and on growth team in particular, it was like 10. You know what I mean? So I'm like, and of those 10, everybody's called a product designer at Netflix. So like of those 10, only like 4 of us were interaction designers. Everybody else was like a motion designer or a prototyper, but they were called product designers. You know what I mean? So I'm like, like I could literally, like I felt like I was in a startup. So that was what really sold me. And then they told me the salary, and I was like, yeah. Where do we sign? And so that was a very easy sign. I should have negotiated more, but I think I negotiated because I think I just saw it. Like it was literally like, no, I'm kidding you guys not. It was a 3x. It was a 3x salary increase.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm just like,
Come on.
Doing praise hands over here.
Yes.
Hello? Yeah. I tell you, I'm in the courtyard of my old job, and I was like tearing up. And I'm looking at it, and I'm like, yo, like, what really got me is I'm dealing with people who they just came from a Google, like my peers, and then they came from a Google, they came from a Facebook. They're like people like Dentley or some other people who like designed the first iPhone. Like literally, I'm like, these are like my peers, right? Or they were on the design team for the first Xbox. Like these are my peers, and and they're tangible. Like I can actually, they're tangible. In that type of regard. So that was for me. I'm like, if I go to Netflix, I'm doing what I thought I would be doing in my design career 10 years earlier than when I'm doing it. That for me, it was easy. My parents were like, "What? You're not going to Google?" All of a sudden, now they believe in design. Yeah, all of a sudden they've shifted now into design. But they're just like, "Yeah, you can't be going to Google. Like, why would you not go to Google? Like, you have to go to Google." I'm like, nah, guys, I think I should go to Netflix. And even my dad would still sometimes say my first like year at Netflix, because they were kind of like, oh, okay. Like he would still sometimes say, yes, my daughter's a designer at Google. And I'm like,
I love it.
LinkedIn exists, father. And so, but like now they're with pride, they're like, yo, like they used to tell me, the stock has doubled since you've been here. Like that's the reason, and so like now they're very much team Netflix, but like, yeah, like I think in 2 weeks' time I shifted like from my whole mindset. Literally since college, I was like, I'm going to Google, and like I went to Netflix, and it was the best. It's the best decision I've made in my career. I would say it's the best decision.
I love it so much. Now, it is so good to hear, because I think Netflix is definitely one of those companies you don't really get behind the scenes very much. So it's so nice to hear kind of your experience. And yeah, obviously, I love the product.
Yes. Watch Netflix this evening. Yes.
So,
thank you.
It's a staple. And it's on a TV, so we're using your product.
Oh, yeah.
Would love to talk about Netflix all night, but I want to get some time in and speak about Kimoyo. Tell us all about Kimoyo. What is it? What do you do? Why do you do it? All that stuff.
Kimoyo is my passion. It's so Kimoyo came out of I kind of touched on it when I was saying like I wanted to speak to Maurice Woods about Interact Project, and like how is the combination of both my loves, like you're teaching people about product design. And at that point, even when I was talking to him, product design had had an impact on my life in that like I had a salary job, it was pretty good, I was living in San Francisco, it was impactful in that way, but monetarily it wasn't still at that point where like working at Netflix or Facebook or Google, whatever is. And when I got the job at Netflix, the first thing I thought of was like, this is the world's best kept secret. Like in that, like you could literally, like if you do 2 years at Netflix, depending on what your financial needs are, but honestly I don't think there's any. I find it hard to believe what a financial need would be that Netflix would not be able to completely, or not to guide with or to help with. But like, it was one of those things of like, you literally could change your family, your life, your financial standing. And I know I'm actually not a capitalist at heart. I actually really have mixed feelings about it, but I understand the value of like having money and not having to stress about money. And I think for me, like when I saw it, I'm like, yo, like the job, you don't have to be like, people think tech, you only think I have to be coding. Like I have to be, maybe I'm doing design, and I'm like, yo, there's so many there's project management, there's program management, there's finance, and all of these people, like Netflix across the board, no matter what role you're in the job marketplace, you are getting the top 1% in terms of pay. And I say that broadly, and I say it loudly for Black people, especially. Well, honestly, mostly. But I say it because I'm like, you are doing a job that you could be doing here for 3x, of what you're doing. And like, I'm one that's pretty open with, what I make when I'm talking. Like if somebody's saying like, hey, if there's a Black person talking to me about they want to apply to Netflix, I believe that you should tell people your salary, because this is how these companies try to get us. And like, nobody knows what they're making. You know what I mean? And it's like, I'm not trying to do it to show off. I'm doing it to let you know, here's how you should communicate and here's how you should negotiate. Yeah. But like, why I say all that is like, people there is like, it's regular people who are millionaires. Wow. Like a regular engineer, millionaire. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, bro, like if that was a Black person, like, you know how much that $1 million was stretched. And it felt like a very well-kept secret because, you know, it's a small company, but you get the brand, you get all the things that you would get, you know, at all these other companies, but you're getting cash. And I'm not an investment advisor. I'm not probably the best person to get financial advice from, but I know in our community, cash is probably king more so than, you know, some of this other stuff. And the great thing with Netflix, you can decide I want to get 100% of my salary in stock. Like, we're very open with it and invest every month. Like, you know, so there's none of this wait 3, you know, like, so I'm like, there's so many benefits that came out of it. And to me, I'm like, yo, there needs to, and at the time, it's not many Black people. You know what I mean? So I'm like, there needs to be more of us here. And that was also when I was like, yo, when I got the salary, I'm like, this thing that I was like, I mean, I really did cry, but it was like, because I'm like, 3 years ago, I was about to fail out of college. I was, you know, lost in what I wanted to do. I knew that I had this stretch goal of wanting to be a product designer. I took the risk of going to San Francisco, and now I'm making this much money, and I'm able to support my lifestyle, my parents' lifestyle. You know what I mean? And it's just like I'm like, this design thing that started drawing on books and whatever, it's changing my life, and it's changing people around me life. I needed to change everybody else's life. And more importantly, when I think about design, I've said this before, I think that Black people are the most creative people in the world. We know this. But the reason why I think about it is I view creativity as a muscle. And I think when I think of creativity, I'm like, this is the muscle that you always have to work at. Right? And for when I think about like what creativity is, like my definition of it is like, you know, your response to a boundary, like your response to like, it's literally like how you're responding to a constraint. That's how I look at creativity, which is why, you know, like it's a creative solution or it's a creative approach, you know, like it's normally rooted in some type of like response to a constraint or to a boundary. For me, that's how I view it. And when I think about that as the muscle that is consistently worked, who has to deal with constraints on a consistent basis? Who has to deal with boundaries on a consistent basis? It's always Black people. Diaspora, which is why I think we tend to be naturally more creative than others. And it expresses itself in different ways, but it's that muscle that's being worked. So I'm like, all these African parents, all these Nigerian parents, all these Black parents are talking about, I don't want you out here, you know, drawing to be a starving artist. Like, you don't have to starve, and you can be creative. So that's kind of where I'm like, from a Kimoyo perspective, I was like, okay, how can we start changing the narrative of design and creativity? And like, you don't have to starve, you know, and you can still enjoy what you're doing in your job. I love my job, which is why I'm talking for like, you know, I'm so long-winded about it. I love my job. And I'm not talking about just Netflix. Like, even when I was designing an Inflection, I loved what I was doing. And so that was when I was like, you know, when I joined Netflix, I was like, all right, I'm surrounded by a lot of people who are not Black. At that point, it was just me and Dantley. Steve Johnson, who's the only design mentor I've ever had in my life. He came as our vice president of design. Again, talk about timing. God really be showing out. Like, timing-wise, I remember I prayed on it and I said, look, God, make it abundantly clear. Because I don't do subtleties. I tell God, let me know. Because I'm not going to know what's going on. You just got to show me. And I think I forgot what happened, but like it made sense to go to Netflix. And then when I joined, less than 2 months later, they had been looking for a new vice president of design for 2 years prior to when I joined. They hired him. They filled the role finally, and that was a month and a half after me. And it was with Steve Johnson, who is one of the 3 Black design VPs in Silicon Valley. You know. And I never heard of him before, but he used to be the VP of design at LinkedIn. He came over to Netflix, and then it became me, because Danley had actually just left to Facebook, actually. So it became me. So when Danley left, it was just me for like a week, and then Steve joined. So I'm like, yo, like, wow, like VP of design is Black. I'm like, all right, God, I got you. I made the right decision. Cool. So, you know, and like, he's now become literally he's my only design mentor I've ever had. And I remember when I was talking to him, like, we need to have more Black people, like, you know, he kind of told me, he told me something where he's like, you can do whatever you want, Mariam. Like, you know, he's like, you can do anything that you want to do at Netflix or in life. And when I started working at Netflix, I think what it gave me is that, like, yo, like, if I can be here, anybody can be here. And so with Kimoyo, what ended up coming from it is like, I wanted to see more people. I wanted to learn more. I was getting a lot of questions. Like, once I started working at Netflix, a lot, you know, people all of a sudden they think they know what you're doing. But before I'm like, I'm the same designer. That was at Inflection. That's now at Netflix. But like I put Netflix in my Twitter bio, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, like, can you do a speaking engagement? Can you know what I mean? So like, you know, I'm like, all right, well, you know, I'll start talking about it. And a lot of the questions I was getting was from a lot of other Nigerian designers, designers, Black designers. They were asking the same questions that I had when I was learning how to be a designer in my, you know, dorm room in school. And I was just like, okay, like these questions are very similar to the things I had. So I'm thinking like, is there a way? And then the design community in Nigeria was also starting to become a thing. And in particular, I think what I saw was Andela, which was, you know, training all engineers. Andela was building that engineering layer, which when you equate it to like Silicon Valley, for me, it was like we had General Assembly, all these like, you know, boot camps about engineers. The next thing I knew was going to come is people are going to need designers. It's just like you see it in India, you see it here, you probably saw it in London. Like it's the same kind of trajectory. First, there's a bunch of boot camps to like train engineers. You have a bunch of people that know how to build things, but they don't know what to build. So the next thing that happens is then it becomes a bunch of boot camps trying to train, you know, designers and teaching people how, you know, what to build. And I saw in Nigeria that like the Andela layer was starting to be built further. And E, who's the founder of Andela and Flutterwave, he was coming to San Francisco in 2018 or so. At this point, I've been talking to my co-founder, Namso, over Twitter, because I just started following a bunch of Nigerian people on Twitter, because I'm like, I want to be inspired by non-white people in design. And I found he wasn't my co-founder at that time. We were just friends. And like, I would give talks at his community, Figma Africa. And like, I would hear the same things over and over again. And then I'm thinking, I'm like, where's the Andela of design? Like, when is that going to happen? In my mind, I was like, I want to create that. And so E happened to come to San Francisco in 2018, I believe. It might have been 2018. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go. It was like some messed office. It was very small, like, you know, San Francisco. No one knows who he is or what he does at the most part, right? So it was like 30 people came to the event. And he's on the panel. And I remember in my mind, I'm like, I'm going to ask one question. And because he's on a panel with other entrepreneurs across Africa. And I said, I'm going to ask one question to get a gauge. This is like my first user test, like to see like, right? You know, like where does design, like talking to non-designers, you know, because at that point I mostly talk to designers. So of course they're like, yeah, design matters, but of course we all say that. I wanted to see where it stood in terms of entrepreneurs across the continent. And like, I think there was people from Kenya. There was a person from Kenya on the panel. A person from like, I feel like it wasn't just Nigeria. So I was like, this is a good way to get like a gauge of it. So my one question was going to be, where is the Andela design? Does it exist? And if it doesn't, do you think there's value in it? And I asked the question, and E answers the question, and he's like, that doesn't exist. Whoever builds it though, like, you know, there's an opportunity, definitely big business opportunity. So I told him, I was like, let's talk after the thing. And so like, and then like, what was also interesting is like some of the other panel members came to me after and they're like, yo, can you take my information? If you're going to do this, like, let me know. You know, so I'm like, okay, so there is a need there. So that was my first, like, you know, very brief sample of 4 user tests. And at that session, E and I, we connected. First time connected, he's like, here, take my WhatsApp info. E is the GOAT. I would say E is probably a mentor. I don't call him a mentor. I call him an advisor, but he's probably a mentor. I should say that now. But E is the GOAT. He's like, take my information. He's like, let's get, you know, lunch or something, or dinner, or not lunch. It was like I think it was lunch. It became lunch that turned into late dinner drinks. And so, but like, you know, he's like, let's get lunch. We go to get lunch. Like this was probably like 2 days later. And again, I've met this man now for maybe a total of like 20 minutes. We talked for like 20, 30 minutes after the thing. And I'm talking to him about this. And so he's like he literally came up with the name, Kimoyo. So shout out to me. Yeah, because I'm terrible at names. If I came up with the name, it would have been like Designers of Africa. Like it would have been bad. And so, but he came up with the name, and we started brainstorming.
What's the meaning behind it?
Yeah, so Black Panther had just came out.
Oh wow!
At that time, yeah, and the whole thing we were like was we want this to be Africans for Africans by Africans.
Okay,
you know, mentors coming in from like other places. We don't want that, and so Black Panther just came out. You know, they have the Kimoyo beads in there, and it's like you can only, if you're from Wakanda, only. Yeah. So then we were like, and we wanted it to be something that was like blank fellow. You know what I mean? Like Harvard fellow, Kimoyo fellow, Oxford fellow, right? And so we wanted it to be something like that. And he was like, what about Kimoyo? Kimoyo beads. And like, I was like, oh yeah. And then I quickly went online later that night and I looked to see if Disney had a trademark on it. And that's when I saw I think it's Swahili. It's a word in Swahili, and I should know what it means, but I don't know what it means. But I knew it was a word in Swahili, so I'm like, okay, Google can't trademark a language.
Oh, nice.
Right. And so I'm like, all right. And literally, I bought the domain that day. It was like, I think I bought like Kimoyo. I bought all the domains, like Kimoyo, Kimoyo.com, Kimoyo Fellowship, like all sorts of stuff. And to make the long story short, the first iteration of it actually was not right because I followed E's advice to a T. E is great, but this is the other thing I would give people advice on is if you're starting to do entrepreneurship. Everyone is going to give you advice. Not all advice is applicable to you. And honestly, most of the time, they're probably not even going to remember they gave you that advice because they're giving it to you from your perspective.
Yeah.
You should really hold true to your expertise. Take some advice, other advice. You don't have to say you're not going to take it. Just don't do it. Yeah. And I think with me, I was like, I'm looking at Ian like this guy. He's created Andela. He's doing Flutterwave. Like I hold him in high regard. And I think I may have taken his advice too literally. And what quickly ended up happening is by the end of 2018, so we tried to do our first cohort. And the idea was that, we were going to travel to Nigeria. I was doing a lot. It ended up becoming this thing that was like the design event, Andela for Design. It quickly became like an upskilling thing for because we noticed that like a lot of people in mid-tier employment in Nigeria, in tech, you don't have a lot of mid-tier people at the time because a lot of them just leave to go to like .com, Adyen, whatever. So we were like, what if we created something that partnered Black tech employees from across the world, but to start off with in San Francisco, like across different industries. So we could have a Black PM, Black engineering mentor, Black design mentor, Black data analytics mentor, right? So any of those core tech and their senior level folks, partner them with companies, teams in Nigeria that were looking to up-level and upskill their more entry-level employees. That was the idea. That's what the idea became. It don't make sense, right? Because it's too much. And so like that was the part where it was like before I knew it, I was interviewing engineers about oh yeah, like we have this company that's interested in because everyone was mostly still talking about engineering time. Like, oh, we need engineers. We would love to talk to an engineering mentor, from this. And I'm like, I don't know anything about engineering. And they're like, yeah, we need back end things. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, this is not making sense. And it ended up failing in its first iteration. I think I ended up losing like $22,000. I put like $2,000 down on something. And I ended up losing that, which again, because of Netflix, I was able to finance this myself. So that Netflix thing comes into play again. And I remember like in early 2019, I was like, yo, this thing was supposed to be designed for Andela for Design. And I remember drawing IDEO of Africa. I still have the Post-it note somewhere. And I was like, we need to go back to the drawing board. And so I told my co-founders at that time. Thankfully, we were supposed to register as an LLC. It never actually got processed because the government shutdown happened. So again, God's timing, man. I'm very lucky. But the shutdown happened, and then we ended up so our process never went through. So my co-founders we never really actually had a company.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So when I messaged them, and they're still some of my closest friends. There was two, and neither of them were in design. So it was also like looking at your designs, like your entrepreneurship team, getting people. I mostly got people I knew and I trusted versus people that we were better suited for what we were trying to execute. And I think it's also because we didn't know what we were trying to build. So I told them, I'm like, look, guys, everyone, I'm making a decision that we should pivot back to what we originally said this was, which is design, Andela for Design, and ultimately IDEO of Africa. And I said, I understand if you don't want to do it. It's fine. Thankfully, we're not an LLC, so you actually there's no formal, dissolving or anything like that. And they're like, yeah, you know what, it's not the right fit. And from there, I remember I messaged them that a week before I booked the trip to go. I took 2 weeks off from work, 2.5, I want to say, weeks off from work in August of 2019 with the intention to do 2 weeks of intense research and interviewing successful design teams and designers in Nigeria. So I was going back to the core of hey, I solved this problem in the ways that I've never would suggest to solve a problem as a designer. I just like kind of assumed it was a problem. Didn't actually do research, didn't actually understand the issues, didn't actually understand pain points and positives people were looking for. So I went back to the drawing board. And they said that I was on the plane. I remember I got the email. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm in this now as a solo founder. And I did 2.5 weeks of like, I literally worked that entire thing. And long story short, I created a curriculum by the end of 2019. I think it was a 3-month curriculum for Kimoyo Fellowship. And I asked NAMSO to join me. By the time I finished the curriculum, I was like, the curriculum's set. I need someone that's good at community builder, that type of thing. And that's how NAMSO and I became partners for Kimoyo Fellowship. So he joined in 2020. We launched our first fellowship cohort in we were supposed to launch in March of 2020. Yeah. And get this, and this is what I'm saying, man, time is crazy. We were supposed to launch in March of 2020. The plan was the fellowship was going to be completely, majority remote, but we would meet in Lagos every week for Saturday design crits. So that would be the only time we meet in person. Okay. So the plan was we were only going to take designers from Lagos or close by because, or design candidates from Lagos or close by. And then COVID hit and we're like, well, that's done. So we needed to reconfigure like that last part of the program to be remote. So it became fully remote, which allowed us to then take applicants from all over Nigeria.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So that was awesome. And then what then happened is this is where Kimoyo Insights comes into play. I tell a story like a Nigerian woman. I'm sorry. And it's just like, I'm sorry. I promise I'm going to be better at this one day. But what happened was we, in design, research is core. Like a good designer is always doing research. It's always looking at understanding their users and what have you. And so we made it core to the curriculum. And so to the point where like literally every week our fellows are doing research. And the plan was they would go on the street. It's called Guerrilla Testing. Yeah. And, right? So like they go on the street, talk to people, and say like, hey, what do you think of my prototype? Right. And it was all like, fake prompts, but like still like, just to get them comfortable with getting feedback and implementing user feedback on there. And so obviously, again, with COVID, that was also taken out of the picture. So we were like, research is 100% the core of this curriculum. How are we going to get participants? So we started looking at like usertesting.com. We literally just looking at places to try to feel like, okay, like let's pay, let's pay for participants from these sites so that we can use it there. And none of them had user testers in Africa. Like nobody had it.
No way. Wow.
No one had it. The only places that did were like local marketing agencies, and it wasn't, and even then it was not many. And they were mostly working with they're doing like market research, and they're like usually the ones that are going out in the field, so they're doing the same thing that we would have said we would have done, but obviously in a different way. Anyways, so when that did happen, we were like, well, you know what, let's just build this for ourselves and we'll just have to figure out how to build it. We did that. And we ended up building a participant database of about 500 people, across Nigeria. And as we're doing it, I'm turning to so I'm like, yo, there might be something here, like this, I know we're focused on the fellowship, so we're focused on that, but there might be let's see how this goes. Yeah. And then let's look up this, for later. And so during that time, we got to work with the Netflix growth design team and the Spotify design team. We had our fellows work with them. Netflix, obviously, I pulled that string. Spotify, they actually reached out to us. Oh, wow. And the uprisings that just happened in the US, so everyone was really like, oh, we want to help Black people, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, look, I would take your guilt. And I will gladly take your guilt. Come on over, But so we actually get a lot of people starting to now notice, they want to, volunteer their time for, designers across the diaspora. So we were getting a lot of people messaging us. So we worked with Spotify and Netflix on the capstone project, which required 4 weeks of research, 4 weeks of design iteration. And the idea was they would do a prompt relevant to that team. So for the Netflix team, it was redesign the sign-up experience to encourage more users across Nigeria to sign up for Netflix, right? So super focused on to make the fellows feel like they are design experts in this, because their perspective, Netflix designers don't have a Nigerian perspective. You have that upper hand. And obviously for Netflix, they got the opportunity to be able to see, what design is like in other places. Just so happened, Netflix is launching a product in Nigeria at that time. And it literally that same 2 weeks, 3 weeks, they launched that product. It happened to be a product that actually I worked on when I was on that team in the time. So timing, I'm like, this is great. And so the fellows are showing their work, and there was a payments bug, unbeknownst to the team. There was a payments bug where people, like majority of the participants that we were interviewing, they weren't able to actually complete signing up for Netflix. And on top of it, we were also able to give other insights on like, hey, like, I can't go into all details about it, but like, there's certain things that like behavioral insights for people in Nigeria and probably broadly people within West Africa were experiencing, and they were expressing that sentiment. As the fellows are showing this work to like my former design teammates, I see the eyes of people, and I'm like, yo, this is actually helping. I'm like, to me, I'm like, this is great. Like they're showing, like, they're showing value. Like they're helping, Netflix designers. This is like my synergy that I wanted. Like I wanted there to be a bridge across like, African designers with designers in the States. So I'm like, hype, get a message from someone on our payments team that's like, hey, she's actually a former colleague of mine. She's like, hey, Mariam, like, I heard about your design presentation that your fellows did. Our payments manager wants to speak to them about the bug that they saw. And so now we're going to, like, they're really presenting their work to a payments manager at Netflix.
Wow.
So, and to me, and as they're presenting this, I'm like, that was free. Was for them. And then I started being like, I told them, so I'm like, yo, I think we might have something here from a revenue perspective so that we don't have to be charging. We never want to charge for education. That's one thing NAMSO and I've always stood by. Is like, in an ideal scenario, we don't charge people to learn. But like, we are more intentional with like who is going to get access to the Kimoyo brand, but we're not going to charge them to learn. Right. And if it is, it's like very meaningless. Like that's our goal was that. So I'm like, yo, we could actually end up using this revenue towards building the fellowship. Yeah. Then I started looking at the margins for user testing, and that was when I really was like, yeah, this is definitely the last one. A study, like margins wise from a study, it's pretty good margins. Yeah. And I started looking into usertesting.com, learning more about their business structure. And since then, we've now become a formal business. We actually got into a fellowship of our own, a venture capital fellowship earlier this year. This is the last week I'm in it. And I'm in the process of like, actually trying to start raising money. Wow. And raising capital for it. Not only Africa, but also within the US, who you would consider your Fortune 500s, unicorns. Like literally, that's been our client base, has been that. And it's rapidly growing in that regard, where it's like, yo, this is actually a venture that has some legs to it. So that's what how Kimoyo Insights came out of Kimoyo Fellowship, how Kimoyo Fellowship came out of Netflix, how Netflix came out of Inflection, how Inflection came out of architecture. And so, long stories, but that's kind of what, we've been building there. And what's wild is by the end of this year, we will reach 5,000. Our stretch goal is 6,000 qualified. I'm going to emphasize qualified user testers across Nigeria, Kenya, Rwanda, Ghana, and South Africa. Wow. Yeah. So we get the benefit. We're paying people for their expertise. So we're actually creating some form of an economy for people out there. And then in exchange, we're also expanding people's horizons, not only in Nigeria or in Kenya or in South Africa, but also in the US, in the UK, and so on and so forth. So it's really interesting to see how people are actually finally valuing the African consumer perspective, and not looking at it as like a handout.
I love it. Oh my God. I have to run the applause.
This is so inspiring.
I appreciate that.
Okay, well, honestly, I feel like we could talk for many, many more hours.
Yes.
Because there's so much I want to dig into what you said, but we can't. We have to stop. But thank you so much, because it's been so inspiring. I guess the only thing we'd say is kind of, obviously we know a bit, kind of the future involves Kimoyo and kind of and things like that. But like, what's next for you? And then how can people find you if they want to find you online? Those two questions.
Yeah, one, I want to also say thank you all, because what you're doing is very in line with, I think, what Kimoyo is doing, which is exposing people of our, background to this world of tech that is obviously the magical world of fairy dust and honestly, it has its flaws, but I think the word that Future says, I don't want to quote Future, but he has a great line, which is, would you rather cry in this Altima or would you rather cry in the Phantom? And I know that sounds very messed up, but honestly, I think there's certain things where it's like the world has its own ways of being messed up to us. I'm going to take tech to be able to if I'm going to be in a messed up world, I'd rather do it in a place where I feel like I'm being able to change my parents in my life. So in that regard, so thank you all for expanding that horizon for people as well. And so next steps for me definitely is becoming Kimoyo Insights and making it be something that I am able to do full time. Right now, it's been a lot to balance both of them. So I'm hoping to get into a place where I am able to do it full time, and Namso and I can do it full time, building an actual product team, raising capital. We are starting to fundraise soon. So if anyone's listening to this and wants to be an angel investor, please talk to us. But yeah, so I think that's probably like the definite immediate next step. Long-term next step is still I have this dream of like us being the IDEO of Africa. The research part is one part of it. The design part is the other part of it. And I think like becoming more of this, like thinking about how the design and product development process works from an African lens, from a consumer lens, from an African specific lens or an African diasporic lens is really what my end goal in life is. And so I think that's like, stretch goal is that. Short-term goal is to be able to do Kimoyo Insights full-time. And if you want to find me, I'm not very active on social, but I do love Twitter. And so, so if you want to follow me, if you want to find me, it's at mbraimah_. And if you ever want to, and if you're looking at Kimoyo Insights or Kimoyo Fellowship, we're at Kimoyo Insights and at Kimoyo Fellows across all social media. So, that would be probably the best thing I would say.
Love it. Oh, I absolutely love it. Thank you so, so much. This was just amazing. Like, I thoroughly enjoyed listening to your journey, and I'm super, super, super excited to see what's coming next. Yeah. So
inspired. Thank you for joining us on this episode of A Seat at the Tech Table. I know that the listeners are going to enjoy, love, get inspired by this episode. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Awesome. Thank you all. And thank you again for starting this. I'm looking forward to more and more of these episodes.
Thanks for joining us today and listening to this episode of A Seat at the Tech Table. You can connect with us on our social media platforms. Just search @SistersInTech on Twitter and Instagram, and check out our website www.sistersin.tech to see what we've got going on. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes, and we'll bring you the next episode soon.